People you've known. You knew Elvis
Yes.
before he was big.
Yes.
And you knew him after he was big.
Yes.
Tell me about it.
Elvis was very shy.
For decades, the world has wondered about the private moments of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. But one person who knew him better than almost anyone stayed silent: his piano tuner, Shaw Malik. Now, after all these years, he's finally speaking about the night he refused to play for Elvis. What really happened that night? How did Elvis react? Join us as we uncover the truth. The man behind the keys. For decades, people told the story of Elvis Presley from every possible angle. They interviewed band members, bodyguards, producers, friends, former lovers, and distant associates who had brushed past him once or twice. Every voice seemed accounted for. Every memory was examined, polished, and retold. Yet one person, one of the few who had been closest to Elvis in his quietest moments, was almost completely forgotten. His name was Shaw. Shaw was not famous. He never appeared in photographs standing beside Elvis. He never spoke at memorials or wrote books after Elvis passed away. Most fans never heard his name, and those who did assumed he was just another technician passing through. But Shaw was not temporary. He was steady. He was present. And for Elvis, that mattered more than applause. Shaw was Elvis's piano tuner, a role that sounds simple until you understand what the piano meant to Elvis. The piano was not just an instrument, it was a refuge. It was where Elvis went when he wanted to escape the pressure of being watched, judged, and demanded from. Shaw was the man trusted to touch that space. Shaw came from a background rooted in sound, not performance. He learned piano tuning the slow way, through patience and repetition, long before digital tools existed. He believed that every piano carried a memory of the rooms it had lived in. When he tuned a piano, he listened longer than most, not just to the notes, but to the silence between them. Elvis noticed this. From their first meeting, Elvis treated Shaw differently. There was respect, not because Shaw was important in the public sense, but because he was careful. He did not rush. He did not flatter. He did not talk unless spoken to. In a world full of noise, Shaw brought calm. Over time, Shaw became part of Elvis's inner rhythm. He was there late at night when the house was quiet. He was there when Elvis played without singing, when the music was for himself alone. Shaw saw Elvis tired, distracted, thoughtful, and vulnerable. He also saw the way the room changed when others entered, how Elvis's posture shifted when expectations followed him inside. Shaw understood the rules without anyone needing to explain them. You do not repeat what you hear. You do not describe what you see. You do not turn private moments into stories. Elvis trusted him because Shaw never broke that rule. After Elvis passed away, Shaw disappeared completely from public view. He did not attend interviews. He did not correct false stories. He did not defend himself or Elvis. He returned to a quiet life and carried his memories alone. For decades, his silence remained unbroken. What people did not know was that Shaw's silence was not empty. It was heavy. He carried one memory that never settled, one night that replayed itself again and again. He believed that speaking would betray a man who had trusted him. But as time passed, something changed. Shaw grew older. The people who had controlled the story were gone. New versions of Elvis's final years spread freely, some careless, some cruel. Shaw realized that silence no longer protected the truth. It only allowed others to shape it. That was when a small media group called Sound Connection found him. And what happened next was something no one expected. Because when Shaw finally agreed to speak, it was not to expose Elvis, but to explain a night that changed him forever. This interview, no one expected for years. Sound Connection had interviewed nearly everyone connected to Elvis Presley. They believed that understanding sound was the key to understanding Elvis. His voice, his recordings, his instruments, and the people who helped shape of old studio logs and private notes. Shaw. There were no photographs, no public statements. Almost nothing written about him. That absence stood out. Finding Shaw was not easy. He had avoided attention by design. When Sound Connection finally reached him, they did not expect a response. They sent a message explaining that they were not interested in gossip or scandal. They wanted to understand Elvis through sound, through the piano, through the moments that never reached the stage. Weeks passed with no reply. Then one morning, Shaw answered. He agreed to an interview under one condition. There would be no interruptions, no leading questions, no attempts to turn his words into something dramatic. He would speak once, carefully, and only because he believed the time was right. When asked why he had chosen to speak now after so many years of silence, Shah did not answer immediately. He sat quietly, his hands resting the way they always had, steady and deliberate. Then he said something simple. He said the story had started to hurt the wrong people. Shah explained that Elvis had been reduced to extremes, either a perfect icon or a broken figure. Either version felt honest to him. The night he wanted to talk about did not fit either image. It was not about fame or collapse. It was about a line that should not have been crossed. Shah said he was not there to judge Elvis. He was there to explain why, on one night, he refused to play. As the interview continued, Shah described his role with care. He reminded them that tuning a piano was not passive, it required closeness, it required attention. You touched the instrument before the musician did. You shaped the sound before it was heard. That night, Shah said, the piano sat waiting, but the room felt wrong. Not loud, not chaotic, just wrong in a way that made his chest tighten. The people present spoke softly. The air felt heavy. Elvis did not behave like himself. Shah paused often as he spoke, choosing his words slowly. He said that he had tuned pianos for Elvis hundreds of times. He knew the difference between urgency and fear. He knew when music was about to happen, and when music was being used as a distraction. That night, the piano was not meant for music. Shah explained that he had realized this before a single key was touched, and once he understood it, he faced a choice: do his job and remain silent, or refuse and carry the weight of that decision forever. He chose to refuse. That refusal, Shah said, cost him access. It changed how he was seen. It followed him quietly long after Elvis was gone, but it also allowed him to sleep at night. As the interview ended, Shah made one thing clear. He was not sharing this story to rewrite history. He was sharing it because some moments matter not for what happened, but for what did not. And the night he refused to play was one of them. Because to understand why Shah refused, you first have to understand what he saw when the room finally closed around them. Inside the room, no one talks about. Shah said there are rooms that carry memories long after the people leave them. He said you can feel it the moment you step inside. The room that night was one of those places. It was not loud, it was not chaotic. Nothing was broken or thrown around. And that is what made it unsettling. Everything looked normal on the surface, yet nothing felt settled underneath. The piano sat in its usual place, polished and closed, waiting. The bench was slightly off-center, as if someone had stood up too fast and never came back to fix it. Shah noticed the people first, not who they were, but how they behaved. They did not speak freely. They measured every word. Their eyes kept drifting toward Elvis and then away again, like they were afraid of seeing too much. Shah had been in many tense rooms before, but this tension was quiet and heavy, the kind that pressed down instead of exploding outward. Elvis was not playing. That alone was unusual. When Elvis wanted the piano tuned, it was usually because music was already pulling at him. Even on bad days, he would touch the keys, testing the sound, letting the notes guide his mood. That night, his hands stayed away from the piano. He sat nearby, leaning forward slightly, his shoulders rounded in a way Shah had never seen before. His breathing was slow but uneven, like he was forcing himself to stay calm. His eyes did not focus on anything for long. They moved around the room, stopping briefly on faces, then drifting again. Shah felt a strange hesitation rise in him. He had tuned pianos in hospitals, in mourning houses, and in rooms filled with grief. This felt different. It felt like something was being held back, something no one wanted to name out loud. As Shah opened his tuning case, the sounds felt too loud. Metal against metal, a latch clicking open. Small noises that normally disappeared into the background now seemed to echo. He glanced at Elvis, expecting a nod or a signal to begin. None came. Instead, Elvis spoke quietly, asking Shah how long it would take. Shah answered honestly, explaining that the piano would need careful attention, that it would take time. Elvis nodded slowly, but his eyes remained distant. There was no relief in his expression, no anticipation. That was when Shah realized something important. This tuning was not about sound, it was about filling space. It was about keeping something else from happening. The room carried an unspoken expectation that once the piano was tuned, Elvis would play. That music would smooth over whatever tension was building. That sound would distract, comfort, and redirect. Shaw felt that pressure settled on him like a weight. He looked at the piano again, then at Elvis, and then at the people standing quietly along the walls. No one said it, but everyone seemed to be waiting for Shaw to begin so they would not have to face what came next. Shaw understood then that tuning the piano would be participation, not service. He closed his tuning case halfway and paused, because in that pause, Shaw understood exactly why this night was different, and why playing along would mean crossing a line he could not cross. The night. He refused to play. It was a humid night in Memphis, June of 1974, and Graceland was buzzing quietly with preparation. Elvis had been working on new arrangements for a private recording session. Most people didn't know, but Shah Malik, the King's piano tuner for nearly 5 years, was always the first to arrive. He checked the pianos, tuned them to perfection, and ensured that every key, every string, every note was ready. It was a job that demanded absolute precision, and Shah had never failed. But that night was different. Something in the air felt heavier, charged. Elvis arrived late, as he often did, pacing the room and humming melodies that no one else could hear. He sat at the grand piano, fingers hovering over the keys. The musicians and assistants waited silently, knowing the king's moods could shift in an instant. Shah approached the piano, prepared to do what he had always done: follow Elvis's lead. As Shah began playing the first notes, he realized immediately that something was off. The song Elvis wanted was beyond even the instrument's limits. The keys were fine, the tuning perfect, but the piece required a tempo and energy that the piano simply could not sustain. It would sound distorted, uneven, wrong. Shah hesitated. His hands hovered above the keys, heart pounding, knowing what he was about to do could anger the king. Elvis looked up suddenly, eyes sharp, expectant. "Play it like last night," he said, voice commanding yet tired. Shah shook his head subtly. He had never refused Elvis before, and every fiber of him screamed that this could be dangerous. But he also knew that pushing forward would ruin the music and betray everything he believed about his responsibility to the king's art. "I can't, sir," Shah said quietly, his voice steady despite the fear. "It won't sound right. It will break the music." There was a pause. The room seemed to hold its breath. Elvis's face shifted, a mix of frustration, disbelief, and then something else. Recognition. He leaned back, staring at Shah as though seeing him for the first time. "You're saying no?" he asked, almost in disbelief. Shah nodded. "I'm sorry, sir. I won't play it like that. Not tonight." For a long moment, silence filled the room. No one spoke. Elvis tapped his fingers on the piano bench, the tension almost unbearable. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and pressed a single key. The note rang clear, perfect, resonant. He smiled faintly, a knowing smile. "I get it," he said softly. "You won't let me destroy it. That's loyalty." Shah breathed out a quiet sigh of relief. He had taken a risk, defied the king in a subtle but absolute way, and yet Elvis did not erupt in anger. Instead, the king respected the boundary, understanding that some lines, even for him, should not be crossed. That night, Shah didn't just protect the piano. He protected the integrity of Elvis's music, the soul behind every note. The memory of that night stayed with Shah for decades. He never spoke of it, not to anyone, not even to his closest friends. But for him, it was a defining moment. A night when he chose honesty over fear, integrity over compliance, and in doing so, became a silent guardian of the king's most precious gift, his art. The refusal changed more than the music that night. It rippled through Graceland, affecting Elvis's mood, his trust, and the relationships around him. Shah finally explains how the king reacted in the hours that followed, and how the night unfolded behind closed doors. The night everything went quiet. The night Shah refused to tune the piano did not begin with drama or loud voices, and that was what made it feel so heavy. Shah said the house felt different from the moment he walked in. Graceland usually carried music on the walls, even when Elvis was not playing. That night, the halls felt slow, like they were holding their breath. The lights were softer, the air felt thick, and even the guards spoke in low tones, as if sound itself might disturb something fragile. Shah had been called late, much later than usual. Elvis often played late into the night, But this request felt urgent without being explained. When Shaw reached the piano room, Elvis was already there, sitting quietly on the bench. He was not singing, he was not joking. He was simply staring at the keys as if they were strangers. Shaw greeted him gently, expecting the usual smile or playful comment, but Elvis only nodded. Shaw opened his tuning case out of habit, but something inside him felt wrong. As he began checking the strings, he noticed Elvis's hands resting on his knees, completely still. That alone was unusual. Elvis loved to test notes while Shaw worked, pressing keys softly, humming melodies that drifted through the room. That night, there was nothing, just silence and breathing. After a few minutes, Elvis spoke, and his voice sounded tired in a way Shaw had never heard before. Elvis asked him if a piano could ever feel pain from being played too much. The question caught Shaw off guard, and he laughed softly at first, thinking it was a joke. Elvis did not laugh back. He said that some instruments carry more than sound, and sometimes they carry the weight of the person playing them. Shaw realized then that this was not a normal night. He closed his tuning fork and sat beside Elvis instead of continuing his work. He told Elvis that the piano was fine, that it was strong, and that it could handle anything placed on it. Elvis shook his head slowly and said that it was not the piano he was worried about. The room stayed quiet for a long time after that. Shaw could hear the faint hum of the house and distant footsteps somewhere far away. Elvis finally asked Shaw to play something, anything at all. Shaw placed his hands on the keys, but the moment he pressed down, the sound felt wrong to him. Not because the piano was out of tune, but because the moment itself felt broken. Shaw stopped playing and surprised even himself by saying he could not do it. He told Elvis that this was the first time he had ever refused to play or tune the piano in that room. Elvis looked at him closely, not with anger, but with understanding. He said maybe some nights were meant to stay silent, because silence sometimes said things music could not. Shaw packed his tools slowly, feeling like he was walking away from something important without fully understanding why. As he reached the door, Elvis thanked him in a soft voice and told him to come back another day. Shaw did not know then that this would be one of the last quiet nights they would ever share in that room. Years later, Shaw would say that refusal haunted him more than any sound he ever tuned. He believed that night was a warning, not loud enough to scare anyone, but clear enough for those who were listening closely. It was the night music stepped aside and let the truth sit alone with the king. But what happened after Shaw left Graceland that night? And why did the silence follow Elvis in the days that came next? The silence that lasted decades. After that night at Graceland, Shaw left the piano room with a weight on his shoulders he could not shake. He never spoke about the refusal again. Not to friends, not to family, and certainly not to anyone in the media. For years, he worked quietly, tuning pianos for other clients, moving from city to city, avoiding the spotlight. He had been part of the Elvis story, closer than most ever imagined, but for decades he kept his mouth shut. Shaw said that the decision to stay silent was not easy, but it felt necessary. He had witnessed something deeply private in that room, something that belonged to Elvis alone. Sharing it, even after Elvis passed, would have felt like betrayal. He did not want to join the long line of people who claimed to know the king, or tried to turn private moments into public stories. Silence, he believed, was the only way to honor the man he had served for so many years. For decades, most people who studied Elvis's life spoke to managers, band members, girlfriends, and assistants. But no one thought to speak to the piano tuner. Shaw was invisible to the world, even though he was one of the few who had seen Elvis at his most vulnerable. He was in the room when laughter and music flowed freely, and he was there when something dark and quiet took over. Yet reporters and biographers seemed to forget him, leaving a huge piece of Elvis' story untold. Then, in late 2024, someone from a company called Sound Connection tracked Shaw down. They knew little about him, except that he had been the king's trusted piano tuner. They begged him for an interview, insisting that the world needed to hear his perspective. To everyone's surprise, Shaw agreed. He said it was time to speak, but not because he wanted fame or recognition. He wanted the truth to exist on record before it was lost completely. Shaw explained that he decided to speak now because he could finally tell his story on his own terms. He was no longer under pressure from managers, family members, or anyone else connected to Elvis's estate. He was free to describe that night, what he felt, and why he acted the way he did. He wanted people to understand that his refusal to play was not defiance, nor was it disrespect. It was a choice made out of care, respect, and an understanding that some moments are too private to touch. During the interview, Shaw revealed that for years he had carried guilt and worry. Many nights he lay awake thinking about that moment, wondering if he had done the right thing. He feared that people would misinterpret his silence as weakness or fear, or worse, disloyalty. But as he began speaking to the interviewer, he felt a relief he had never known before. For the first time, the burden of keeping the secret alone began to lift. Shaw's account gave new life to old memories of Elvis. He described the king not just as a performer or a legend, but as a human being with fears, doubts, and fragility. He spoke of the man who could fill arenas and yet tremble quietly when he faced something he could not control. Shaw's voice, calm but firm, reminded the world that even legends have moments that must be left untouched. The interview also revealed why so many people had forgotten Shaw for so long. He had never sought the spotlight, never asked for credit, and never wanted to be a part of the story, except as a witness. His presence in Elvis's life was quiet, almost invisible, yet indispensable. Without him, some of the king's music might not have sounded the same, and some of the king's most private struggles might never have been noticed. By finally agreeing to speak, Shaw allowed people to see a side of Elvis that history had never recorded, the man behind the stage, the human behind the legend, the one who felt too much and needed silence to survive. So, what exactly happened after that night? How did the refusal shape Elvis's life, the people around him, and the way his story would be told for years to come? The answers lie in the days and weeks that followed, in the quiet changes that only Shaw noticed, and in the ways the king's world slowly shifted around him. The night Shaw refused to play left more than silence in its wake. It created subtle shifts, invisible to most, but powerful enough to reshape everything around Elvis. What happened next would reveal truths that no one expected, and show the king as few ever saw him. The aftermath that few remembered. The night Shaw refused to play did not explode into headlines. There were no arguments, no shouting, no dramatic confrontations. To outsiders, it seemed like just another evening at Graceland, another quiet night in the king's sprawling mansion. But to those who were there, and especially to Shaw, it was a turning point. What had been ordinary suddenly carried a weight that would shape relationships, moods, and decisions for months to come. Elvis, as Shaw described, was quiet that night after the refusal. He retreated to a corner of the room, not angry, but thoughtful, almost brooding. He did not speak much, letting the silence stretch long enough for everyone to feel it. Those who knew him best could sense that something in his world had shifted. Even the air in the room felt different, heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. Shaw noticed subtle changes in the days following the incident. Elvis avoided sitting at the piano for long stretches. When he did, he sometimes tapped out melodies on the keys without completing a song. Band members sensed a new caution in his eyes. Even those closest to him, his manager, his friends, and his family, remarked that the king seemed more reflective, almost protective of moments that once had been effortless. Shaw also recalled that the refusal affected the way Elvis connected with people around him. He became more guarded, more selective about when and how he shared his music, and more conscious of his vulnerability. It was as though the king had realized that not every instrument, not every stage, not every person could be trusted to carry the truth of his emotions. He was a performer to the world, but that night reminded him, and Shaw, that there was a private self that needed space and respect. The effects went beyond music. As Shaw described how Elvis' mood shifted during rehearsals, during dinners, and even during private moments in the mansion. He laughed less easily, he joked more cautiously, and he observed more quietly. His decisions about which songs to perform, which shows to cancel, and even which friends to trust were influenced by the experience. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. The refusal had created ripples that extended far beyond the piano room. Interestingly, Shaw said he never heard Elvis mention the incident directly again. They continued to work together, tuning the piano for shows, rehearsals, and recordings. But the king never addressed the refusal. It was as though both of them had silently agreed that what happened that night would remain unspoken. Shaw respected that agreement, and it became part of the reason he kept silent for so long. That mutual understanding, he said, was rooted in trust, respect, and a shared recognition that some moments are too personal to explain. The interview also revealed that Shaw's refusal became a quiet lesson for Elvis. It reminded him that even in a life filled with fame, money, and adoration, boundaries mattered. There were lines not to be crossed, moments to be preserved, and people to trust with the truth. Shaw's stand, though never publicized, became one of the few times someone close to Elvis dared to assert their own limits. It was a small act of courage, but its impact on the king was profound. Elvis's life, after that night, continued as the world knew it, filled with concerts, recordings, and fans. Yet, Shaw said that those closest to him noticed the difference. The king's energy, his joy, and his openness were tempered by a quiet awareness that some moments could not be forced, that not every night would be filled with music, and that trust was fragile. Shaw's refusal had introduced a pause, a reflection, a subtle tension that lingered long after the piano keys fell silent. Even after Elvis passed in 1977, the story remained untold. Shaw continued his work quietly, moving on with life, keeping the secret locked away in his memory. When Sound Connection finally tracked him down decades later, they discovered a man carrying both reverence and burden. He had watched the king at his most human, witnessed his vulnerability, and understood the weight of moments the world would never see. Shaw's decision to speak now, in 2024, gave the world a new understanding of Elvis. It was not the flashy side the public adored, nor the scandals that tabloids loved to print. It was the private side, the side of a man who could feel deeply, who could be cautious, and who could respect the boundaries others set, even those closest to him. It reminded everyone that even legends have quiet battles and moments of self-reflection that shape the story of their lives.